I don't even know how I did this. Maybe it was subconscious, but somehow this interview turns out kind of just like the Frost Nixon interview, in such that in the beginning, I completely tank it. But luckily by the end, there's some good information that really comes out. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, senior editor for Creative Screenwriting Magazine, and man, you could just watch me stumble. I don't know why. Maybe I was just too in awe of good old Peter Morgan, whose writing I absolutely love, but luckily I caught up to myself after a while. But yes, that was my homage to Mr. Frost, was tanking the beginning of the interview. I was extremely excited to have Peter Morgan back to discuss Frost Nixon with us, and we did this screening the night before it was WGA nominated, and I was not able to get it into iTunes before I went to Sundance. So obviously, aside from the congrats on the WGA nomination, while I was at Sundance, Frost Nixon got an Oscar nomination. So of course, congratulations to Mr. Morgan again on that nomination as well. Of course, don't forget to check www.creativescreenwriting.com to find out what's in our latest issue. You can look for our magazine on newsstands in the United States, Canada, the UK, Western Europe, and as I've somehow forgotten to mention many times over, Australia. Yeah, we're down under. Somebody wrote in about it and reminded me of the fact that I've been an idiot by not mentioning it. So, all you folks down under, go grab yourself a copy of the magazine. We'd love to hear what you think about it. But now, without further ado, let's jump right onto the stage right after I introduced Peter Morgan to discuss his latest film, Frost Nixon, the night before he got WGA nominated. By tradition, and this is kind of record-breaking here, first off, let me give you the November-December issue of Creative Screenwriting Magazine with your story as the cover story, Frost Nixon, written by our editor, Amy Dawes, who's here. And of course, we also have our January-February issue, which has the top 10 of the year, and Frost Nixon, you made the list, baby. There you go.
Thank you so much. Thank you, baby.
So we had you in the screening series for The Queen. We're really happy to have you back. And I usually start with questions. I want to start with a request. Is there any way that you could make all of your successive films after this with journalists as the protagonists? Because I thought it was fantastic. No, we usually start with breaking-in stories. We covered Shalom Joan Collins in our last discussion for The Queen, so we won't put you through that again. While you're deserving a really well-deserved perception of an overnight success, what I want to do for a minute is remind people that it's not an overnight success. You've had hard times. It's tough to be a screenwriter. Talk about some of the tough times you had way before things really started clicking into place.
Okay, well...
Into the mic.
Yeah, hello. I was... I thought I wanted to act. Well, you can't tell. I thought I wanted to act. And as you can see, I'm hopelessly ill-equipped for that. And did a performance of a Shakespeare play where I just had the most terrible attack of stage fright, and I vowed then never to do anything like that again. And then started writing. And
were you able to go on stage? Did you freeze up with a line of dialogue as an actor? Or?
Yeah, I sort of just well, not unlike this feeling of, this is an unnatural thing to be doing, and why are they all staring? And anyway, so I then. Started just writing, and I wrote some plays while at university, and then somebody came backstage of one of the plays, a producer, and sort of said, I'd like to meet the writers, and I was working with another writer at the time, and this chap asked us to write training films, industrial sales training films, and we did that for a while. And I think, it was genuine penury insofar as, we would both sit there, and it was just when the very first Amstrad computers came out, which were the size of a sort of refrigerator, and were green, and they shone in green. So and I wrote for, these sales training films for John Cleese and an English comedy actress called Penelope Keith, and did that for a long time, but never stopped writing. And I think, never have earned a penny doing anything else.
In the film, they try and figure out what was Nixon's lowest point. Obviously the night before his resignation, the decision to resign. What would you say your lowest point was? Was there ever a point where you...
quite close to it now.
The question would be, was there ever a point you were considering giving up, and if so, what kept you going?
I think probably all the time, and I think that each time feels appallingly difficult, and there doesn't come, I'm afraid. There doesn't come the moment where it feels easy, and where you think, oh, thank God, writing, well, that's a blast. I'll just leap out of bed and do that then. That moment hasn't happened yet, and I have a hunch it probably won't.
Plays are tough to adapt. It seemed like you had a chance to cut your teeth, obviously, by being a playwright yourself. What did you learn from adapting William Shakespeare's Henry VIII with Ray Winstone for the 2-part, 250-minute miniseries?
Well, I didn't adapt. That isn't an adaptation of William.
It was not?
No.
Interesting.
I wish it had been. It would have been a lot better. Given that it's not an adaptation of William Shakespeare, does that render your question invalid?
It does.
Okay.
It does. Moving on. I heard in 1993 you saw a TV bio of David Frost. And
am I on drugs? This is terrible. We are dragging out all the... I see. Oh, yes, it's the biography. I beg your pardon.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I thought you were going to reach into the cupboard for another painful experience.
No.
Okay.
He downplayed the drama, I think, was the way the story goes when you first met him, of what the experience was like. But then you met James Reston, to my knowledge, and
right.
he told you about what really went down. Talk about how David first presented it to you, and then how you changed your mind and realized there might be something there.
Happily. The David Frost is... Are there any English people here? Yeah. So the Brits here will know that Frost is a very successful figure in the United Kingdom, and but he doesn't. His success is not one that's been. I mean, what Michael Sheen did in the film, hopefully will give you an idea. He's not a man who suffers from much self-doubt, and it's been quite difficult writing this, having him around. I mean, I tend to try not to have someone I'm writing about anywhere near me, and he's tried to. It would be as though you were trying to paint a portrait of him, and he were behind your shoulders, going, "A little bit prettier, please." And so when I first met him, the documentary that inspired this thing in 1993 that I saw, which was a sort of a television biography of David Frost, somebody in Japan has apparently contacted Universal and asked for, please, what is the name of this program so that maybe we can reference it or something. So I wrote to somebody that I know had tracked it down in the UK, and they wrote back, and part 1 was called The Rise and Rise of Sir David Frost. And it was sort of like that. It was sort of David Frost reflecting on his glory years, cigar in hand, which is sort of what he's like when you meet him. And so I rang him up and I said, I wonder if I could meet you, and I'm thinking of writing a play about the interviews. Yes, of course. let's meet at Claridge's. And we met at Claridge's, which is a very posh old hotel in London. In the days where you could still smoke, we now have a smoking ban there too. And he lit a cigar at 8 o'clock in the morning and promptly just sort of disappeared behind this sort of, And his questions, I mean, normally, if some geezer with a leather jacket who's saying they're going to write a play about you sitting opposite you, you've got to smell a rat. But he didn't. He sort of said, "So who do you think will play me?" And that was his question. I was like, aren't you going to ask anything else? And he was terribly friendly, and yes, I'll write you a letter to go and meet all the other fellows. And then Madeleine Albright, who was at the neighbouring table, came over. "Hello, David." "Madeleine, hello." And then I was standing in the middle like an idiot. And he said, "Do meet one of our most promising playwrights, Colin Morgan." It was just a sublime first meeting. And so then I went, having heard how, I went to meet Jim Reston, who is this furious man in Washington, and he was still twisted with anger about the whole thing, and he was saying, it was so incompetent, and there was such, chaos, and the ethics of checkbook journalism, and thought, as I started talking to him, I suddenly realised, there are so many different points of view here, and that's what started a pilgrimage. I then went and met pretty much everybody that you saw the dramatised versions of, and they all had such conflicting views of what happened that I thought it might be quite interesting to start diving in there.
To my knowledge, once you were working with Stephen Frears, you actually finally had the time, many years later, to write it when Frears decided to go off and do Mrs. Henderson Presents.
Bastard.
You were upset, right?
I was upset because he was
going to make your movie.
Yeah, well, no, he said he said with the Queen. He said because we discussed the Queen, and we had Helen, and then he said to me, "If I were you, I wouldn't put Tony Blair in it." And I said, because I'd said, but I think it should be a continuation of our first one, and No, don't put Blair in. So I struggled trying to write it with Stephen's one script note, which is not to put Tony Blair in, and it was just agony. The entire story was. Do you remember that? Any of you have seen the Queen? The chap who comes in with the basket, "Ma'am, yes, ma'am." The private secretary, that chap. Well, the whole story was basically set with him as the central character. And the story was that he lived on a little hut on the estate, and that the senior private secretary had gone away on holiday, leaving him in charge because nothing was going to happen because it's August, right? And so he'd invited a couple of friends up, and then, of course, the catastrophe of Diana's death happened, and then suddenly the whole world was, and that he would be the interface in between the world and the Queen in her lunatic German Schloss up in Scotland. And so it's not a bad idea. I mean, it kind of works with this poor bloke who's completely out of his depth, and I just couldn't write it. And when I can't write something, it comes out slow is not the right word for how it was coming out. I just couldn't, I try to do 5 pages in a day, which I then frantically rewrite, and in a week I hope to get about somewhere in between 7 to 10 pages done a week. But I try and write 5 pages a day, which I then tear up and scrunch. But just the act of saying I've done 5 means I feel like I'm making progress. And it took me 3 or 4 months, and I'd done barely 30 pages, and I knew something was wrong. When it's going that slowly, something's wrong. It's not you. There's something wrong with it. And I said to Stephen, I rang him up and I said, "Do you know what? I can't write it. It's a disaster." And because he'd said, "I'll work out what I'm going to do next, and you need to hand it in by the 1st of March." And around Christmas, I rang him up and I said, I don't know what to do. I think it's rubbish. Forget it. And then I went away and I thought, well, fuck it. Oh, sorry. I thought, well, bollocks to Stephen.
Oh, no, it's okay to use the word fuck. We're just in iTunes as a podcast.
Okay, all right. Well, fuck Stephen then. And fuck. So I thought, fuck Stephen, and then I can't get enough of it now. I'm going to put Tony Blair in it, and I wrote the script terribly quickly, and so it just was like unplugging it, and suddenly the whole thing made sense. And I rang him up when I was on about page 98 of 110, when I knew, I even knew where, I knew I was going, it's done, and it felt good, and I rang him up, and it was February the 14th, so well within my deadline. I rang him up, I said, guess what? He said, oh, you haven't fucking written it. And I said, I have. He said, is it any good? And I said, I think it's okay, I think it works. He said, oh, God. I said, why? I've still got until March 1st. He said, no, I've committed to something else. And I said, what have you committed to? How could you can't have committed to something. You said first, blah, 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 and he'd already said yes. And he said, I can't. I've said yes to Judi Dench. I said, well, she can play the Queen. And he said, no, I have to do it. So he went off to do this other film, and I was penniless. And you only get the check on the first day of principal photography, right? And
sometimes you could get in advance, actually.
No. No.
Ouch.
Yeah, no. I mean, you could get a sort of a little bit of writing fee, but you didn't get the check.
Right. True.
And so I was skint and furious with him. And yet he had committed to then making it afterwards, so I knew that I would have to be friends with him again. So I thought, well, how do I get over hating him so much that I can't speak? And the only way was, I thought, to do something that I would never have done otherwise. So I thought, and I really literally thought it's either write a play or something like bungee jumping, something where I thought, had it not been for Stephen, I would never have done that, I was trying, as they say, to turn a negative into a positive. And that's where I thought I'll write the play. And so I borrowed money and went to Washington to meet, Jim Reston, and that's where it all started. So it was, and my hopes for Frost Nixon were genuinely not more than this. If this could play in a pub theatre, I would feel vindicated.
How long did it take you to write the play?
About 6 months.
And that included your research as well?
Probably, yeah. And then I did a lot of table readings. I mean, given that we're amongst screenwriters here, I found that so helpful. I would say that if there was any conceivable way to avoid taking any money before you write something, not because being poor is good, but because it stops other people telling you what to write. If you can keep other people's voices out of the process for as long as possible, and if you can own what it is that you've written for as long as possible, and if there's any way you can beg, borrow, or steal friends to read it, actors, anybody, just to hear it, you will know immediately what to change. And Frost Nixon was written with 3 table readings. I never got a single note, ever. And that was done, I could hear it. And when I did the first table reading, the people who were reading the parts were wildly inappropriate, to play the parts. I mean, they looked ridiculous. But you could hear that the Nixon part, that Nixon toying with Frost was quite funny. So I completely rewrote that and gave Nixon probably a character that might historically be inaccurate. But it felt appropriate as an expression of the power imbalance between the two. And the phone call, first version of the phone call was very short. It was actually quite perfunctory. Just rang up and sort of shouted at me a bit and put the phone down. And then when I heard it, I suddenly thought, no, it's an important moment. And have the courage of your convictions and go, And so that was all from hearing. I wouldn't have got any of that from notes, I don't think.
We're going to get to the phone call in more depth in a second. Just a quick question about table reads, because you say it's so important. Did you also record them and play them back later?
No.
So just live?
Yeah.
Okay. So in the moment, you were taking notes. Just about the characters for a second, you really have like an unnatural gift for character pairings that involve an emotionally cold, lonely people who have kind of become insulated by their own power, intermixed with someone who's a vibrant newcomer. You know, you get this in Gordon Brown and Tony Blair to an extent, the Queen and Tony Blair, Idi Amin and Young Doctor, and now Frost Nixon. What attracts you to that pairing?
I don't know. I promise I'm going to stop it soon.
I hope not.
No, because it's, you know, people have rumbled me now, and I've got to. I don't know. It's sort of. It just feels natural, you know. When we did The Queen, there came a really interesting point where we'd finished the film, and Scott Rudin, the producer, felt that obviously Helen's performance would be the one that people would really connect with, and that the way to guarantee Oscar, you know, recognition of some shape or form would be to have he urged me to write a powerful plate throwing scene. I mean, not a plate throwing, he didn't literally, but a scene in that he said there's high drama missing in the first act. He said we've got it in the last two acts, but we need a real high octane performance moment from Helen in the first act. I didn't know what he meant. And I mean, I knew what he meant, but I didn't know how I could possibly help. And instead, because we still had some time and some money left over because it had come in under budget, I asked Stephen to shoot more Tony Blair scenes, which is what I felt was missing. And we didn't shoot a single frame extra of Helen, but we shot 4 days of more Tony Blair to make it much more. My point is about. My point would just be about what I was talking about. It's about counterpoint, which is that the more we put in about Tony Blair, the more it lifted Helen, and the effect of shooting extra scenes of one actor transformed the performance of another, whom we left completely untouched, and it was really weird. It felt like we'd shot a month extra Helen by the end. And yet, of course, we hadn't touched her.
You were Oscar nominated for The Queen. You did an excellent job. I love the film. As a play, Frost Nixon really started to take root. A lot of people loved it. To my knowledge, there was a lot of directors that were coming after you to kind of be in it, ranging from George Clooney, Martin Scorsese, and Sam Mendes. I think Ron Howard did an absolutely amazing job. But out of sheer curiosity, how do you, on a phone call or a meeting with Martin Scorsese, say, nah?
Well, I didn't have a phone call with Martin Scorsese, but rather than say why I didn't choose the others, I just want to say why I did choose Ron.
Great.
I knew that this needed an American. I felt very uncomfortable with the idea of somebody English, you know, or not American. I felt that it's such an American subject and such an American trauma. And I felt ill-equipped and unqualified to be dealing with it, frankly, as an outsider. So I really wanted American, and I don't think there is anybody more American than Ron Howard. And also I wanted somebody who had no connection with the theatre whatsoever to protect me. You know, I wanted to make sure that a real filmmaker, somebody who thought filmically, and also I'm, you know, not ashamed to admit, I really love Ron Howard's work, and I'd met him on a few occasions beforehand as as he'd asked me to write a couple of things, and it hadn't worked out for one reason or another. I really liked him, and I also felt that he had the dignity and the emotional maturity as a man, not to take sides, and impartiality and delicacy of that impartiality is critical to this material. And I didn't want a Nixon hater or anybody who was known as this or that. I didn't want any of that. I wanted somebody who could sort of, as it were, navigate without being partisan.
He did an amazing job. Back to what we were talking about earlier about adapting a play. This had been a play. Sometimes plays are not filmic. This was filmic. But you had to go through some changes. For instance, I know in the play that you kind of had dueling narrators of Kevin Bacon's character and obviously Sam Rockwell's character. Reston and Brennan. It served well in the play, but you kind of had to lose it for the movie. Talk about that change and some of the other changes that you made as you yourself adapted your own work.
Well, the first thing I did was I told Ron that I wanted to get rid of all the narration, and he patiently, smiled and said, "Okay, have a go." And I tried, and it was disastrous. But I, and then I was nervous because I suddenly thought, well, how are we going to make this work? And so he suggested the idea of an interview, with several people, and when we liked that because what it dealt with was it brought more television into it. So we wanted to try and keep a television frame or a television in the background. We wanted to keep the theme or the subject of television in it, almost in every frame of the film. And so to be making television interviews of the people who had participated in a television interview, and always to have cameras or TV monitors or something like that visible in frame to keep it thematically consistent. And there were a number of things, where opening out, as people call it, came very easily to a story where people had gone from Australia to New York to California to London, and it felt naturally quite big. Its shape, as I sort of thought about it, it felt very wide at the beginning with Nixon in Washington and Frost in Sydney, and it would come right down to a close-up where really pretty much all you see is that, and that it started with so that was the image that we started with that it starts that big and comes down to
the first act really seems like it's about stakes. You see the ambition of Frost, and then you see Nixon at the Orthopedic Society of Houston, just angry at kind of the
orthodontic.
Did I say orthodontic?
Doesn't matter.
Sorry.
It's just it's so important.
I wrote it down wrong. Sorry, my apology. Where he's furious, that his presidency will be remembered as these set of anecdotes. You really put the stakes well played for both characters. How important was that for your momentum of kind of the first act leading up to their meeting?
Well, I always hated it in the play, and I still kind of hate it. I don't hate it as much in the film as I hated it in the play. I used to sit and watch the play and just will things to speed up to get through what I thought was very ugly flip-flop character exposition. And my experience watching the play was always shame, deep shame for the first time. No, I'm serious, really, honestly, deep shame for the first half hour, and embarrassment, and thinking, why has no one already walked out? And then you become lowered into, and then what happens is you sort of go, actually, no, I get it. No, I sort of understand why you had to do that. Yeah. And then by the end, you sort of think, I'm actually seeing something quite important, and it sort of lulls you in a fight. It is very. Technically, it's not good. The first half hour.
I actually love it. I think it's great.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to say it's bad. I'm embarrassed by it, but not in the film so much.
I'm shocked to hear this.
No, in the play, because it really is plonk with him, plonk with them, plonk with him, plonk with them, until finally, thank God, they come together, and the plonky plinky pays off, and so I used to find it painful in the play.
Fair enough. Two really quick questions, and I want to get to the heart of the matter. At what point they said that the production was going to cost Frost $2 million, and they're essentially, with a few cameras in a living room. What was the cost that added up to $2 million in the 70s like that? Because I was actually surprised at that number myself.
Yeah, I think it's about loss of earnings as well. I don't think it's about how much he spent. I think it's also about what he's given up.
Gotcha.
And what the compensation costs for that would have been.
That makes sense. Did Nixon really ask him if he had been fornicating the night before?
Yeah, that was slightly out of context. Nixon said that to electricians in the coffee room when he was trying to be a blokey bloke. So that idea about Nixon screwing with Frost's head before the first question, I'm afraid I made all that up. But Nixon saying that line, he said, but in a slightly different context. But it was, how could you leave that out? It's so good. But actually, the correct delivery of that would have been, so you guys do any fornicate. I mean, it's like that. It was trying to be blokey. It was like trying to be one of the guys, one of the crew members.
You shouldn't have given up on acting, sir. You should not have. All right, getting to the meat of the matter. The phone call, it's an absolute showstopper. It's a moment of brilliance. It's almost the icing on the cake before the climax of the film, which follows it. It's important to note that it's also a scene that was invented, to my knowledge. Talk about the reason for inventing it, because it's so entertaining that it's almost like you just felt that there was a dramatic beat missing from kind of some of the other procedural elements that were going on.
Absolutely.
Okay. Talk about inventing.
Definitely I felt that, and definitely I felt that, and definitely also I was itching to get in. And I felt that I'd been, as it were, wearing, having to wear other people's clothes, as it were, throughout. And that, boom, I could really... And it sort of really flew out of me, that scene. The justification historically that I have for the scene is that in the Anthony Summers biography of Richard Nixon, he made, one of the whole chapters is about Nixon's psychological state, and that he'd been seeing a psychiatrist, and that he was on mood stabilizers called Dilantin. And that he has everybody, famously, Richard Nixon has a very light head, and he would only have one whiskey and would be quite sozzled. And the combination of Dilantin and Scotch meant that he was regularly having blackouts. And James Schlesinger, the then the National Security Advisor, he had become really concerned by Nixon staying up. And this is in the latter months of his presidency. And he had become very concerned by the president's behavior, and that the president was up all night and ringing people all around the world. Time difference. Someone's got to be in somewhere.
Drunk dialing is the correct term.
Drunk dialing, and he'd been very concerned because he'd rung all the Joint Chiefs and said, "Look, if the old man rings you up and says, we're going in." Ring me first, and
that's terrifying.
Yeah, terrifying, really terrifying. So I knew that Nixon. So I know it's a matter of record that Nixon was drinking, taking mood-stabilizing drugs, which was leading him to blackout, and drunk dialing, which is an expression I'm not going to forget. And so I thought, well, great, let him do it, And I was already thinking of the payoff, that he wouldn't remember that he'd drunk dialed, and that Frost would then have that over him for the final day, and also I just wanted to write about self-destruction, because the one thing that you know about Richard Nixon is his self-destructiveness, and I wanted to somehow get to the root of it. And the previous scene was an invention for the film, the piano playing.
Where they say that it's an 11-0 win, sir.
Right.
You're doing great.
Yes.
He didn't seem comfortable with the concept of winning.
That's my favorite scene in the film. But the reason why is because at the moment where he should realize that he's actually going to win, a true self-destructive. Once you reach the point where you've actually burst through and you're on the summit. That doesn't tally with a self-destructive person. A summit is an uncomfortable place for a self-destructive. And at that moment, rather than, I thought, and, Ron and I worked out that you would go in on his face very slow, and that you would see that rather than enjoy that moment, that moment represented fear for him, and that to make sense of his universe, a self-destructive will have to implode. And so in the following scene, what he does is he drunkenly rings up David Frost and galvanizes the person who should otherwise be destroyed by him into killing him. So he provokes the person into killing him. And that to me was an interesting way of exploring a self-destructive instinct.
Exposition is always tough, but interestingly, you saved this amazing bit of exposition for that scene as well, where Nixon's talking about them both feeling out of place, look down on the snobs. That's the first time he looks at the dossier. Talk about saving that exposition for that particular scene in that particular moment. Because it was, exposition is what most writers hate. And again, it was brilliant here.
Oh, thank you. Well, I just figured, I hadn't thought it through too logically, but I figured that we've spent too much time talking about their differences. and that actually in a situation like this, talking about their similarities would be pretty interesting, and what would the similarities be? And of course, immediately these are two men possessed by raging ambition, which is a hideous condition, and they, you know, both. I know that from both reading about both of them, that both Frost and Nixon were. They had desperate insecurities, and Frost's way of doing it is to have as many parties and to be as conspicuous as a success in public as possible. You know, Nixon never could quite cope with people. Both desperately wanted acceptance, particularly from the social upper class. Both men obsessed by getting the approval of their hires and uppers and well-born and so forth.
It was an excellent parallel. It came at the perfect place. Also fascinating about the same scene is it really is Nixon's scene. Frost does not have much to say, but the tension for Frost during that scene, hanging on every word, is what the audience ends up doing. Was there ever a version of it where there was more of a dialogue between them?
No.
Or was it always... Okay.
But no, there wasn't. But Michael Sheen would love what you just said, because Michael, for example, they did 340 performances of this play, and 340 times Michael had to stand there acting, doing nothing, while Frank basically does the pyrotechnics, and then would get a standing ovation, and Michael would feel that he'd been completely overlooked. And there was one night, he won't mind me telling you this, I don't think, there was one night where I think the frustration of it had got too much, and when people started clapping, he just screamed out, "Shut up!" And it was like, oh my God. That had been building up for a long time. He just literally on Broadway just stood up and just went, "Shut up!" to the audience. And I think they must have been freaked. And his point is, I think, was that, you know, the fact that he's not saying anything doesn't mean he's not acting his socks off.
I agree.
And
listening is the most important part of acting.
Yes, and in the film, as a way to sort of make sure that we got every bit of what Michael was doing, Ron shot the phone call live. So we had two sound stages where Frank and Michael were actually on the phone to one another, and we were shooting them on sound stages side by side, and
That's
Ron
great.
would run in between the two. It was the closest that I've ever come to an action sequence. It was my proudest day.
As the emission begins later in the interview, you know, Jack Brennan, Bacon's character, he halts the interview.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a crazy, chaotic moment. Talk about the research that went into what happened in that moment. And, you know, it's just amazing that they were able to pick it back up at that point.
Yeah, well,
because it does separate the fighters to their sides of the ring.
The Nixon team were very, this is another self-destructive thing, the Nixon team had prepared every part of these interviews meticulously, but Nixon would not prepare Watergate. He didn't share any part of that with his team. And again, I sort of think, well, that's just so indicative of somebody, you know, who's going to throw themselves off the bridge. And his team didn't know. I don't think they knew. And when I talked to them all, they were still not in agreement about whether it was good for Nixon to give something or bad. There were some of his more hawkish Rumsfeldian aides felt that he had nothing to apologize for. Others felt that he was never going to be able to move on as a man without a full disclosure and a full apology. And so his team was split on this. And I think that when he was about to blow, the Jack Brennan character wanted to make sure that everyone was on side for what they were going to do. And that, of course, was what infuriated the Frost team, was that once again drew attention to the artifice of the situation. So if it wasn't artificial enough already with, you know, him having been paid, you know, a profit share. And people in Washington, when we went to Washington to talk about it, felt that there must be some kind of collusion, that actually Nixon knew that he stood to gain more profitability-wise.
So he was a shareholder in the profits,
Yeah.
not just from the upfront fees?
Yes.
Oh, I love that. How is that not in the movie, my friend?
I'm sorry.
All right. Apology accepted.
No. You are owed an
That's
apology.
fascinating.
I should have made more of that.
I'm joking.
No, I should have made more of that. You're quite right. You're absolutely right. I should have made more of it, and I kick myself for not having made more of it. I think, to be honest with you, I think I may even have only have discovered the full 20% thing after I'd written it. But that's still no excuse. We should have.
So he had a 20% take?
Yeah.
Wow. So his demise is actually his financial rise. That's brilliant.
Yes, except that when people in Washington sort of slightly busted me on not having done enough on that, which I accept, my feeling is there is not 1 gram of a collusion in Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon would know more. This is a legacy. This is everything. This is, no politician's going to think, look, I'm going to sacrifice my legacy, but I might get a couple of grand here. No politician thinks like that, least of all someone as proud as Richard Nixon. So whilst I should have made more of the 20%, because it just shows, the reason why I should have made more of it is because it asks an audience to make a more difficult decision about how they feel about Frost. Because on the one hand, he violates every journalistic and ethical code by paying what would be the equivalent of $3 million today. Imagine if George Bush, he paid him $3 million for an interview. And
but in the film, actually, they say that CBS and Mike Wallace had an offer of $350,000.
Yes, they had.
So they were going to pay.
They were going to pay. That doesn't, in my view, I beg your pardon? It doesn't. It doesn't exonerate either CBS or David Frost.
Okay.
I mean, both stink. But Frost paid $600,000 and 20%. And but the real point is whether the 20% would have inspired Richard Nixon to, in some way, collude in a fabrication. And that I'm absolutely satisfied that's not the case.
That is a different movie. Good old Swifty Lazar, I'm sure, was happy with that 20%
good deal.
as well. Yeah, very good deal. Last question before we open it up to the crowd. I know you are jet lagged, and we're really happy to have you here. There's a line of dialogue right before the interview when Frost talks about the call. It's a setup and payoff in which, Nixon had kind of thrown him off before. This is a moment where, intentionally or unintentionally, he throws off Nixon, and Nixon says, "Did I really call you last night? What did we talk about?" You told our editor, Amy Dawes, in your interview that it's first off a fantastic line, but you told Amy Dawes that you considered actually cutting that great line.
Which one?
When Nixon says, "We talked last night. What did we talk about?"
Yeah, no.
I'm surprised.
No,
why?
Michael Grandage, the theatre director, wanted to cut the scene.
Why?
He wanted to end on. The interviews were over. That's it. He felt that it was a wildly over-sentimental scene, the final one. And I said to him, "You have got to be kidding. This is where it all goes on." I mean, particularly the parallels. The point I particularly wanted to make was about you should have been the rigorous interviewer and either. Because, Nixon, the whole idea of Nixon having chosen a career in politics, which is conditional, hinges on being liked. And yet he was a man who could barely tolerate human beings and who had a negative attraction. There could be 100 people in the room who quite like Nixon. He could walk in and by the time he just breathed through the room, only 40 would like him. He's a man, he has what Gordon Brown, our current Prime Minister, has. He's so uncomfortable in his own skin that it's infectious. And it's a profound tragedy to witness in anybody, let alone someone who's chosen a career then in public life.
So keeping that line, that fight, it ended with you basically saying what?
It ended with me saying, "Please try it. Let's try this for the first month, and if we both feel that the play is wildly sentimental at the end, then fine. But
and by the time it was a film, that was always going to be in there.
He couldn't cope with the idea of the shoes. I mean, the shoes.
Really?
Yeah. I said, "Stay with the shoes. Please stay with the shoes." And
you're talking about Ron Howard?
No. This is the theatre director, Michael Grandage.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he didn't want the box at the end either, the shoes being given?
No.
Interesting. Well, I'm glad he was silent. So let's open it up to the crowd for some questions. The question was in regards to the shoes. Did that really happen?
Well, he did. Richard Nixon did say, those are those shoes Italian? And do your, He said that line, and I then built something out. I thought that was so telling of a man who's peering over the fence at the neighbours who are having fun. And it's like it's like somebody wanting to be Austin Powers, and David Frost, a playboy wears shoes without laces. And all that thing about, "Sir, I would find that stuff effeminate." That was just I couldn't I couldn't resist all that.
So David giving him the shoes after was...
So David giving him the shoes, that was an invention. Okay.
Yep.
Good invention.
Yep.
Great ending point. You, sir, right there in the glass. What were you trying to communicate with ending the film with Nixon looking out to the sea?
Well, that was not how the film originally ended. The film originally, as written, and this isn't how the play ended, by the way. The play ended on a sort of a meditation about the connection between politics and entertainment and media and the collusion between the two. And we felt that would be too, not cerebral, but just too stagey a piece of, I don't know, it was so clearly a reflection and not drama, and it felt very theatrical. And so I actually opted in the screenplay for having Richard Nixon, after Frost has gone and driven off into the sunset, and we hear what James Reston says about, Frost goes back and gets his jobs back and so forth, that Nixon puts the shoes on and tries walking in the shoes, and in walking in the shoes, he sort of slightly he disappears, into the sunset, as it were, into the shadows. And Ron shot it, and it's lovely. And this is where testing came in, because we tested it, and it tested through the roof. Everyone loved the ending of Richard Nixon and the shoes. But Ron, contrary to popular characterization of Ron, where people, I think, tend in this country to feel he's a sentimentalist, Ron took it out, and the film tested lower. And I backed out of this because I sort of felt that this was something you could see, I could see in our partnership, he was really caught up in this. This really mattered to him. So I picked my fights, and I wasn't going to pick this one because I could sense that he was really, had strong feelings about this, and he was nervous about cutting it. But I thought, so in the end, actually, Staring Out to Sea was not how it should have ended, and it's almost an accidental ending. Why Ron would prefer him staring out to sea, you'd have to ask him that. But I think it's more to do with him not wearing the shoes and actually not trying them out.
Fascinating. You, sir, right there. Great question. In an industry that really goes for PG-13, this was rated R. Obviously, for language, was there ever a PG-13 cut?
I really can't understand it. I mean, I can't understand. There's such cultural differences as well. I cannot understand that at all. So I can't offer an explanation, and maybe your censors were all on drugs.
I think it's odd too. Yeah.
What is that? What is there to shield?
There's a law technically with the MPA that you could use the word "fuck" in a PG-13 context as long as it's non-sexual. I think twice.
This is the least sexy film I've ever seen.
I know. No one has sex in the movie. Makes no sense to me. Makes no sense to me. Right here, you sir in the second row. He enjoyed the sports feel of the movie. Was that a conscious decision with the back and forth?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it was my technical, the challenge that I felt would be to write a pretty conventional gladiatorial movie where the only words and the only violence was inflicted through either thought or words. And so that absolutely was the challenge. And I also felt that if I was going to write something which was so about a verbal and ideological clash, that it needed to have real adrenaline behind it, so that an audience wouldn't drift off into a coma. And so I really went for that whole thing. And that was how I always thought the film. I never thought the film was a political film. I always thought the film was a sort of like a boxing, like a Rocky thing. And I've changed my view now. I do think the film's political now.
And you also at one point said, I read that anytime it got too political, you made changes to the play where people were trying to compare it to what's going on now with George Bush. You had done some rewriting in that context too, right? Yeah,
I stripped out. There were more references, particularly in the Vietnam sections and the foreign policy sections, and it was uncomfortable to me. I didn't like it. I didn't want the play to be not reduced, but I didn't want the issues thrown up by the play to become pared down to being a Bush metaphor. I didn't want people to think, he's written a play about Iraq.
I mean, Nixon's enough, right?
Yeah. I wanted, and all the questions that it throws up about, the media and power of editorial control and the responsibility of all that. But I've now changed my view. Since Obama got elected, I've changed my view. Something about the spirit of bipartisanship and the rush to sort of heal wounds and to move on and have a united America scares the crap out of me. And because I think it would suit the new administration, and you can't blame them for this, to have no more mention of George Bush whatsoever. It's partly what Gerald Ford did. It's one of the reasons why he wanted to move on from Watergate. He quickly pardoned Nixon and move on. Now, whilst no one's... I just got a real problem with Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Karl Rove, all slipping off into really comfortable retirements now and just being conveniently forgotten. And actually, as this has gone on, it's only since Obama's become elected that I've suddenly gone, this is a political play. And not only that, it's an important political play about accountability. And what makes it interesting is that it's about the accountability and the conviction of one particular criminal through completely unconventional means. And how heroic is it? Frost, on the one hand, did something so unethical. And yet, on the other hand, he's the only person that achieved what the internal political process should have done. The judiciary committees, the political opponents, none of them did what Frost did to Richard Nixon in that sense. And those questions concern me much more now. And I'm just sort of, it's so convenient now that we've got a financial crisis to just forget about Iraq. And
Bush and Cheney haven't been pardoned yet, so hopefully... hopefully some of the things that happened.
I don't know the name of the person, but there was somebody who did an interview with Dick Cheney 2 nights ago, because I got a message from Ron Howard this morning. And he said, and because I'm not American, I don't know the names but apparently there was some guy who we know, because he came to the opening night of Frost Nixon, who was just going absolutely in Cheney's face. And Ron was saying, God, there's no doubt whatsoever that we were seeing some sort of a spin-off from this, and that there'd been some sort of positive effect. I don't know whether Ron's delusional or not. But
hopefully a lot of things will come to light in the next year or so.
I've got a horrible feeling they won't.
I hope not. What's next? I mean, is the deal and the Queen is the final installment with Tony Blair?
Yeah, I've got one more to do. Have
you written it yet?
Yeah, I have.
What's the title?
Special Relationship.
Special Relationship. Do you want to tell us anything about it?
Well, it's the relationship. I'm sorry. It's the relationship between Tony Blair. That's the last one, and Bill Clinton.
Are you happy with it?
Yeah, it's really naughty.
All right. I would hope so. Yeah. I think you're really talented. I can't wait to see what you do next. Give it up again for Peter Morgan. Thanks a lot, man.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again for Peter Morgan, not just for putting up with me, but for coming back into our screening series and podcast. And congrats again on his now Oscar and WGA nominations.
If you dug this episode of the podcast in general, consider tossing a virtual tip into our PayPal virtual tip jar by visiting www.creativescreenwritingmagazine.blogspot.com and look for the PayPal icon. Your tips are appreciated and definitely help out with equipment, hard drives, and all the other stuff we need to keep this podcast running. Of course, feel free to check out my blog, which I even managed to update on the rare occasion that I have time to do so by visiting www.jeffgoldsmith.blogspot.com. You can also always feel free to drop me a line by emailing me at yo.goldsmith@gmail.com, and I'll do my darndest to get back to you as soon as I can. Of course, don't forget to click that subscribe button in iTunes or your podcatching software, because that's how episodes are downloaded automatically every time you click refresh. And if you have a minute, feel free to leave us positive feedback in the iTunes Music Store or at podcastalley.com. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, Senior Editor for Creative Screenwriting Magazine, thanking you again for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.